The air in the grand ballroom of the Volkov estate was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying sting of gunpowder, a reminder that in this world, even the most beautiful things had teeth. Ilara, her first name from a tragic noir, her last name Sterling from a high-stakes heist film, stood in the deepest shadows of the mezzanine, her fingers digging into the cold marble railing. Below her, the man she had bled for, the man she had kept secrets for, was ending her world with a single, practiced motion. Dante, first name from a gritty crime saga, last name Moretti from a classic tragedy, held the hand of a woman in a dress the color of a fresh wound. He didn't just lean in to kiss her. He took the ceremonial silver needle of the Volkov syndicate and pressed a drop of ink into the shell of her ear. The mark. A public declaration of ownership, a vow of protection, and a crown she had been promised for 3 years. To the elite of the underworld it was a celebration. To Ilara it was a funeral for the woman she used to be. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. She simply felt the heat of his betrayal cauterize her heart, leaving behind something harder and far more dangerous. Before we follow Ilara down a path of cold vengeance and into the arms of the one man who could truly burn Dante's empire to the ground, I want to say a huge hello to my incredible viewers. It is so good to have you here for this journey of heartbreak and power. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing our community grow across the globe. And if you're ready to see a woman reclaim her power in the most unthinkable way, make sure you've subscribed to the channel. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Are we ready to walk into the lion's den? Let's begin. Dante looked up, his dark eyes scanning the room with the arrogance of a king who thought his pawns would never move on their own. For a split second, his gaze brushed the mezzanine, but Ilara was already gone. She moved through the back corridors of the estate, her silk gown whispering against the stone like a warning. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take the jewelry he had bought her. She only took the small, jagged blade she kept strapped to her thigh and the one thing Dante didn't know she had: the access codes to his private port authority. She stepped out into the pouring rain, the neon lights of the city blurring into streaks of electric blue and crimson. She didn't head for the airport or a safe house. She walked 3 blocks into the dead zone, the neutral territory that separated the Volkov territory from the obsidian towers of the Romanovs. Standing under a flickering street lamp, drenched and shivering but with eyes as cold as a winter grave, she waited. 5 minutes later, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up, their engines purring like hungry predators. The door of the lead vehicle opened and a man stepped out. Nikolai, first name from a sprawling spy epic, last name Sokolov from a gritty underworld thriller, Dante's greatest rival and the man who had spent a decade trying to find a crack in Dante's armor. Nikolai didn't look like a butcher. He looked like a titan, calm, calculated, and dressed in a suit that cost more than the street they stood on. He held an umbrella over her, the sudden absence of rain feeling like a sanctuary. "You're a long way from home, little dove," Nikolai murmured, his voice a low, smooth vibration that held none of Dante's jagged cruelty. "Does Dante know his most precious secret is standing in the rain on my doorstep?" "I don't belong to Dante anymore," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the encrypted drive containing the port codes, the keys to Dante's kingdom. "I want to watch him lose everything. And I heard you're the only man with the stomach to do it." Nikolai looked at the drive, then back at the woman who had just committed the ultimate treason. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, not a smile of lust, but of a master chess player who had just been handed the winning move. "Walking away from a man like Dante usually ends in a shallow grave, Ilara," Nikolai said, stepping closer until she could smell the sandalwood and expensive tobacco clinging to him. "If you come with me there is no going back. You won't just be a guest, you'll be the spark that starts the war." "Then give me a match," she whispered. Nikolai reached out, his gloved hand tilting her chin up. He didn't mark her. He didn't claim her. He simply watched the fire in her eyes and realized that the woman Dante had discarded was the most dangerous weapon in the city. "Get in the car," Nikolai commanded. "Let's go burn a kingdom." They arrived at the Sokolov stronghold, a towering monolith of glass and steel that overlooked the harbor. It wasn't a sprawling estate like the Volkovs. It was a fortress of modern efficiency. As the elevators hummed upward, Ilara caught her reflection in the polished chrome. Her makeup was smudged, her hair damp, but her eyes, First name from a vintage thriller, last name Vane from a gritty mystery, looked like Flint. You're remarkably calm for a woman who just committed high treason, Nikolai noted, stepping out into a penthouse that was all marble and minimalist shadows. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass and handed it to her. His touch was brief, professional, and surprisingly warm. I've spent 3 years being Dante's shadow, Alara replied, taking a cautious sip. The burn of the bourbon centered her. I learned how to hide my pulse before I learned how to load a gun. He thinks I'm a decorative bird, Nikolai. He doesn't realize I was the one keeping his ledgers balanced while he was out playing king. Nikolai leaned against a mahogany desk, his gaze raking over her with a calculated curiosity. His deepest desire wasn't just to destroy Dante. It was to prove that intellect always outmatched ego. He feared chaos, preferring the cold logic of a well-executed plan. And in Alara he didn't just see a beautiful woman. He saw a strategic goldmine. Dante Moretti is a blunt instrument, Nikolai said, his voice a low, smooth rasp. He marks women to prove he owns them because he's terrified of losing them. I don't believe in branding, Alara. I believe in investment. If you stay here, you aren't a trophy. You're a partner. But know this, I don't protect people who can't protect themselves. I'm not looking for a savior, she snapped, the fire in her gut flaring. I'm looking for a weapon. The relationship between them began to shift from curiosity to a dangerous, mutual respect. Over the next few days, Nikolai introduced her to his inner circle. There was Victor. First name from a Cold War spy drama, last name Kazov from a high-stakes action flick, Nikolai's enforcer and a man who looked like he was carved from granite. He viewed Alara with a silent, lethal skepticism. Then there was Sophia. First name from a sprawling family saga, last name Rossi from a classic noir, Nikolai's lead analyst, a woman who moved through data like a ghost. Alara realized that the Romanov Empire wasn't built on fear, but on a terrifyingly precise loyalty. Nikolai didn't demand it. He earned it through a series of calculated moves that kept his people safe and wealthy. He's looking for you, Nikolai said one evening, standing on the balcony as the city lights twinkled like a circuit board below. He held out a phone. Dante has burned 3 of my warehouses in the last 48 hours. He's frantic. He's reckless. He's exactly where I want him. He doesn't want me back because he loves me, Alara whispered, staring at the screen where Dante's name flashed in a missed call. He wants me back because I know where the bodies are buried. Literally. Nikolai stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. He didn't reach for her waist or try to claim her space. He simply stood beside her, a wall of calm in the middle of her storm. And do you want to go back? Alara looked at him, at the man who was everything her former lover was not. Dante was a hurricane. Nikolai was the deep, silent ocean. And as she looked into Nikolai's eyes, she saw a hidden depth, a secret vulnerability that suggested he wasn't just using her as a pawn. He was dangerously intrigued by the woman who had walked away from a god and didn't look back. I want to see him realize that the woman he marked was the wrong one, Alara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous octave. And I want to be the last thing he sees before his world goes dark. Nikolai reached out then, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. It wasn't a possessive gesture. It was an acknowledgement. Then we have work to do. But remember, Alara, the heart is the most difficult thing to protect in a war of empires. Make sure yours is as cold as you claim it to be. The morning began with a vibration that rattled the windows of Nikolai's penthouse. It wasn't thunder. It was an explosion. 3 miles away at the Romanov-controlled shipping yard, a black plume of smoke choked the horizon. Dante hadn't just attacked a warehouse this time. He had hit the nerve center of Nikolai's logistics. He's not thinking, Alara whispered, standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass, her reflection ghost-like against the rising smoke. That yard was holding a shipment for the Italians. He's starting a war with 3 different families just to get to me. Nikolai stepped into the room, his silk shirt pristine, his expression as calm as a frozen lake. Behind him, Victor, first name from a high-octane action flick, was already on a secure line, barking orders to mobilize the perimeter teams. Recklessness is the final stage of a failing dictator, Nikolai said, his voice a smooth, low anchor in the chaos. He walked over to Alara, handing her a sleek, matte black handgun. He sent a message to the lobby. A courier delivered a box. Would you like to see what's inside? In the center of the marble kitchen island sat a small, velvet-lined jewelry box. Inside wasn't a diamond but a severed lock of hair, blonde, identical to Alara's, and a note written in Dante's jagged, aggressive scrawl. I mark what is mine. I burn what is stolen. Come home, Alara, before I run out of patience. The inciting incident had shifted from a corporate heist to a personal vendetta. Dante wasn't just trying to bankrupt Nikolai anymore. He was hunting. He thinks I'm hiding, Alara said, her grip tightening on the cold steel of the weapon. He thinks I'm a bird in a new cage. He doesn't realize I'm the one who opened the door. Then let's show him the difference between a cage and a fortress, Nikolai replied. He turned to a holographic map of the city. He's moved his main operations to the Gilded Lily, a club on the edge of the neutral zone. He's throwing a celebration for his new bride-to-be tonight. Satrapalar. He knows I can't let a hit on my docks go unanswered. He expects me to send Victor with a strike team. But you aren't going to do that, Alara realized, her mind racing. You're going to send me. The room went silent. Victor stopped talking. Nikolai looked at her, his calculated gaze searching her eyes for a hint of hesitation. He saw none. He saw a woman who had been humiliated in front of the world and was now ready to return the favor. If you walk into that club, Dante will try to take you, Nikolai warned, stepping into her personal space. The scent of his sandalwood cologne was a stark contrast to the smell of smoke outside. My men can only get you so far. Once you're inside, you are his guest. His rules. I know his rules better than he does, Alara said, a dangerous, cold smile touching her lips. He thinks I'm the weak link. He doesn't realize I'm the fuse. The plan was set. This wasn't just a move in a larger game, it was a declaration. Alara wouldn't be rescued, she would be the one to deliver the ultimatum. But as she prepared for the night, a flicker of something passed between her and Nikolai, a moment of shared danger that felt far more intimate than anything she had ever shared with Dante. If he touches you, Nikolai whispered, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek, I won't just destroy his business, Alara. I will erase his name from history. The stakes were no longer just about power or ledgers. They were about a woman who had found a man who respected her enough to let her fight her own battles, and a man who was starting to realize that his pawn might be the only person he's ever truly cared about. As she crossed the threshold, the sea of tailored suits and silk dresses parted. Whispers followed her like a trail of smoke. The ghost has returned. The runaway bride is back. Alara didn't look at the guards. She didn't look at the cameras. She walked straight to the center of the VIP lounge where Dante sat, his new marked woman clinging to his arm like a decorative vine. Dante's glass froze halfway to his lips. The smug, jagged grin he had been wearing for the benefit of his underlings vanished, replaced by a raw, predatory hunger. Alara, he rasped, his voice cutting through the music. He stood up, his presence an oppressive weight. I told you you'd come home. I knew the moment I burned those docks, you'd realize where you belonged. I didn't come home, Dante, Alara said, her voice a cool, steady blade. I came to deliver a message from a man who actually knows how to keep what he owns. Dante's face darkened, a vein pulsing in his temple. He stepped into her space, the familiar scent of his expensive cologne, charcoal and heavy musk, trying to trigger the old, submissive habits she had spent years unlearning. He reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers twitching with a possessive reflex. You're playing a dangerous game, little girl, he hissed, leaning down so only she could hear. Nikolai Sokolov is a ghost. He's a calculator. He doesn't love you. He's using you to get to my ports. When he's done, he'll discard you like the trash you've become. He doesn't have to love me to respect me, Alara countered, not flinching as his hand gripped her jaw. Which is more than I can say for the woman wearing my promised mark. The tension in the room reached a screaming pitch. Dante's men moved closer, their hands hovering over their holsters. From the shadows of the bar, Victor and two of Nikolai's elite trackers shifted, their eyes locked on Alara. One wrong move, one sparked temper, and the Gilded Lily would become a slaughterhouse. You think you're safe because you're in a public place? Dante sneered, his grip tightening until it bruised. I own this city, Alara. I could take you right now and not a soul in this room would breathe a word. Try it. A new voice rang out, smooth as silk and cold as a winter grave. Nikolai Sokolov stepped from the velvet curtains of the private terrace. He wasn't supposed to be there. The plan had been for Alara to go in alone, but Nikolai had never been a man to follow a script when the stakes were this high. He walked forward, his hands in his pockets, looking like a man taking a stroll through his own garden rather than a rival's stronghold. Dante, Nikolai said, his gaze flicking to the hand on Alara's jaw. Take your hand off my partner. No. Or I'll show you exactly how calculated I can be with a lead pipe. The rising tension had hit its zenith. The two most powerful men in the city stood inches apart, with Alara, the woman who had sparked the fire, right in the center. The red herring was revealed. Dante thought this was about a woman, but as Nikolai leaned in, he whispered the true stakes into the silence. The Italians didn't just lose a shipment at the docks, Dante. They lost their trust in you. While you were busy hunting Alara, I was busy buying your board of directors. You aren't just losing a girl tonight. You're losing your chair. Dante let go of Alara, his eyes wide with a sudden, frantic realization. He looked around the room, seeing his own lieutenants looking away, their loyalties already bought by Nikolai's silent, steady gold. But Dante wasn't a man to go down quietly. He let out a jagged laugh and pulled a small silver detonator from his pocket. If I'm losing the chair, Nikolai, then no one gets to sit in it. The club went dead silent. The music stopped. The only sound was the rain hammering against the roof and the ticking of a clock that was running out of time. You think you're so much smarter than me, Nikolai? Dante spat, his voice cracking with a jagged, hysterical edge. You think you can just buy my life out from under me? I built this empire on blood, and I'll bury it in fire before I let a calculator, like you, audit my soul. Nikolai didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood like a statue of ice, his gaze fixed on Dante with a terrifyingly calm intensity. But beside him, Alara felt the air in the room shift. She looked at the detonator, then at the specific way Dante's men were positioned, not to guard him but to block the exits. The game-changing twist hit her with a sudden, cold clarity. Dante, stop, Alara said, her voice cutting through the tension. She didn't sound afraid, she sounded pitying. You aren't going to press that button. Not because you're afraid of dying, but because you've already lost the one thing that makes that explosion worth it. I lost you. Dante roared, his thumb twitching. I lost my port. I lost my board. No, Alara said, stepping forward until the silver needle of the detonator was inches from her chest. You didn't lose the board to Nikolai's money. You lost them to the truth. Nikolai, tell him. Tell him why the Italians really stopped taking his calls. Nikolai's expression remained unreadable, but his silence was a confession. Alara turned to Nikolai, her eyes narrowing as the midpoint revelation unraveled. The shipment at the docks. It wasn't just ruined by Dante's fire, Alara whispered, the realization dawning on her. It was empty before the fire ever started. Nikolai, you didn't buy the board of directors. You are the board of directors. You've been the silent partner in the Volkov syndicate for 5 years. You didn't take me in to get to Dante. You took me in because I was the only witness left who could prove you were the one who ordered the hit on my father 10 years ago. The room went bone-chillingly cold. Dante's confusion mirrored the shock on the faces of the surrounding guards. Nikolai Sokolov, the calm, calculated rival, wasn't the savior Alara thought he was. He was the architect of her entire life's tragedy. The man who had manipulated Dante's rise just to have a front for his own shadows. The stakes had just been rewritten in blood. Alara, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency that no longer felt like a sanctuary. Felt like a trap. I told you that the heart is the most difficult thing to protect. You were never a pawn. You were the ledger I couldn't balance. You killed him, Alara breathed, the midnight blue silk of her dress suddenly feeling like a shroud. You let Dante take the blame, you let me live in his house, you watched me love a man I thought was my enemy, just so you could keep your hands clean. Nikolai finally reached into his jacket, but he didn't pull a gun. He pulled a heavy old-fashioned brass key, the key to a safe deposit box Alara's father had died protecting. I didn't just order the hit, Nikolai admitted, his eyes showing a flicker of a dark, possessive obsession. I saved you from it. Dante was supposed to finish the job that night. I intervened. I placed you in his path so I could watch you grow from a distance. I waited for the day you would finally realize he wasn't enough for you. I waited for you to walk into my reign. The betrayal was total. Dante, the ruthless boss, was just a loud distraction for the silent monster standing next to her. Elara was caught between the man who had publicly humiliated her and the man who had privately destroyed her life before it had even begun. Dante's hand trembled on the detonator, his face pale as he realized he had been a puppet in Nikolai's theater for his entire career. You used me as a guard dog? For her. You were a very effective distraction, Dante, Nikolai said, finally drawing a silenced pistol with a lethal, practiced grace. But the play is over. Purpose. Push characters to their breaking point. Make the situation appear hopeless. You're both monsters, Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the rain on the skylight. She looked at Dante, whose hand was still shaking on the detonator. A man so desperate for control he was willing to atomize everyone in the room. Then she looked at Nikolai, who stood as calm as a saint in a cathedral, his silenced pistol leveled with terrifying precision. I saved you, Elara, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to that smooth, manipulative hum she had mistaken for safety. Dante would have let you burn with your father. I gave you a life. I gave you the chance to become the woman you are tonight. You gave me a cage with a better view. Elara screamed, the despair finally breaking through her flinty exterior. You let me love a man who was destined to betray me just so I would run into your arms. You didn't save me, Nikolai. You harvested me. The darkest hour reached its peak as Dante let out a jagged, broken sob. The realization that he was nothing more than a pawn in Nikolai's game had finally snapped the last thread of his sanity. If I was just the guard dog, Dante rasped, his thumb pressing down on the silver button, then I'm going to bite the hand that fed me. Dante, no. Elara lunged for him, but Victor, Nikolai's enforcer, was faster. He slammed his shoulder into Elara, sending her crashing into a velvet booth, just as the first set of charges detonated in the basement. The floor bucked like a living thing. Dust and plaster rained from the ceiling as the lights flickered and died, leaving the club plunged into a terrifying strobe-lit hell. Screams erupted from the crowd of socialites and lieutenants as they scrambled for the blocked exits. The Gilded Lily was becoming a tomb. Elara scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing, the smell of cordite and old dust filling her lungs. Through the haze of smoke she saw Nikolai. He wasn't running for the exit. He was walking toward her, his silhouette ghost-like against the orange glow of the fires starting below. The building is coming down, Elara, Nikolai said, reaching for her arm with a grip that was no longer gentle. It was iron. Victor has the car waiting at the service entrance. Come with me and we leave this city behind. Dante is dead, the board is gone, and you and I can start over. There is no us, Nikolai, Elara spat, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. She looked around the collapsing room. Dante was gone, buried under a fallen chandelier or lost in the stampede. A king of nothing. She was alone with the man who had murdered her father and spent 10 years pretending to be her shadow. She was trapped. The exits were blocked by fire. Her only protector was her greatest enemy, and the man she had once loved had just tried to kill her. There was no way out, no allies left, and no script that ended with her walking away. The darkest hour wasn't just the building falling down. It was the realization that Elara Sterling had never been free, and in this burning room she never would be. I'd rather burn here than live another day in your shadow, she whispered, her hand closing around the jagged piece of broken glass on the floor. Nikolai's eyes darkened, the calculated mask finally slipping to reveal a raw, obsessive hunger. I didn't wait 10 years to let you die in a nightclub, Elara. You're coming with me even if I have to carry your corpse. The turning point didn't come from a rescue or a miracle. It came from the realization that Elara had been playing a game she thought she was losing, when in reality she was the only one who knew the board. You said you didn't mark what you owned, Nikolai, Elara said, her voice dropping to a calm, lethal frequency that cut through the roar of the fire. She didn't back away. She stepped into his space. You said you invested. But you forgot one thing about a high-stakes investment. Nikolai paused, his fingers inches from her arm. What's that, Elara? The investor always loses the most when the asset decides to liquidate, she whispered. In one fluid motion, Elara didn't use the glass shard in her hand to strike Nikolai. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the small, encrypted transponder she had taken from Nikolai's desk 3 nights ago, the one he thought was a simple paperweight. It was the master kill switch for the Romanovs' private cloud, the digital vault holding the evidence of every hit, every bribe, and every murder Nikolai had ever authorized. "I didn't just give you Dante's port codes, Nikolai," Elara said, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. "I used your own network to upload your ledger to the federal task force. The moment Dante hit that detonator, the signal went live. The gilded lily isn't just burning, it's being surrounded." The turning point hit Nikolai like a physical blow. The calculated Titan finally faltered. For the first time in 10 years he wasn't the hunter, he was the prey. The blue and red lights of police cruisers began to strobe against the smoke-filled windows, a silent chorus of his downfall. You'd destroy yourself to take me down?" Nikolai rasped, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and a twisted, newfound adoration. "I'm not destroying myself," Elara said, backing toward the service elevator she knew Victor had left unguarded to come find Nikolai. "I'm finally finishing my father's work." The key to the conflict was revealed. Elara hadn't walked into the path of a rival out of desperation. She had walked into it as a Trojan horse. She had used Dante's jealousy to get into Nikolai's house, and Nikolai's obsession to get into his vault. She was the one who had orchestrated the inciting incident by leaking the port's vulnerability to Dante in the first place. Suddenly the service elevator dinged. But it wasn't Victor. It was Sofia, the Romanovs' lead analyst, the woman who had quietly watched Nikolai's cruelty for years. She held the door open, her eyes meeting Elara's in a silent pact of sisterhood born from surviving monsters. "The police are at the front, Nikolai," Sofia said, her voice devoid of its usual subservience. "But the back alley is clear. Only for one of us." Nikolai lunged for Elara, but a secondary explosion in the kitchen sent a wave of heat and debris between them. The floor cracked, a jagged chasm opening in the marble. "This is where you stay, Nikolai," Elara shouted over the roar. "In the house you built on my father's grave." She stepped into the elevator with Sofia. As the doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Nikolai Sokolov, the man who thought he owned the shadows, standing alone in the light of the fire, realized that the woman he saved was the one who had finally sentenced him. Sofia drove with a white-knuckled precision, weaving through the gridlock of emergency vehicles. The climactic resolution wasn't a final shootout. It was the high-speed dismantling of 2 legacies in real time. On the car's dashboard tablet, the progress bar for the data upload hit 100%. "It's out," Sofia whispered, her voice trembling. "Every offshore account, every bribe to the chief of police, every recorded conversation Nikolai kept as blackmail. It's all hitting the federal servers. By morning there won't be a Romanov or a Volkov left standing to collect a debt." But the resolution wasn't complete. A pair of headlights suddenly crested the hill behind them, roaring through the flooded streets with a suicidal speed. It was a rugged, armored SUV, Dante's personal vehicle. "He's alive," Elara breathed, her hand going to the door handle. "He must have been near the service exit when the roof went." Dante wasn't trying to pull them over. He was trying to ram them off the bridge. The SUV slammed into their rear bumper, the screech of metal on metal sparks flying into the night. Elara looked into the rearview mirror and saw him. Dante, his face bloodied, his eyes wide with a feral, scorched earth madness. He had lost his mark, his kingdom, and his dignity. All he had left was his rage. "Sofia, keep it steady," Elara shouted. She scrambled into the back seat, kicking out the shattered remains of the rear window. The wind whipped her hair into a frenzy as she leveled the matte black handgun Nikolai had given her. This was the moment of absolute choice. She wasn't the chosen one anymore. She was the judge. Dante roared, swerving to pin them against the concrete barrier of the bridge. "If you won't be mine, you won't be anyone's," he screamed, his voice lost to the gale. Elara didn't hesitate. She didn't aim for Dante. She aimed for the front tire of the heavy SUV. Crack, crack, crack. The tire disintegrated. The armored vehicle shuddered, its weight becoming its own enemy. It fishtailed violently, the back end swinging out as Dante fought the wheel, but the momentum was too much. The SUV slammed into the bridge railing, the reinforced steel groaning before snapping like a toothpick. For a heartbeat, The vehicle teetered on the edge of the dark, churning river below. Alara locked eyes with Dante one last time. In his gaze she saw the realization that he had never really known her at all. Then with a slow, heavy tilt, the SUV vanished into the abyss. Silence returned to the car, broken only by the hum of the engine and Sophia's heavy breathing. "Is it over?" Sophia asked, her voice small. "The war is over," Alara said, lowering the gun. She looked at her hands, they were steady. The unthinkable act of walking away had led to the ultimate act of liberation. She hadn't just escaped the lions, she had let them tear each other apart. As they crossed the city limits, the first hint of gray light began to bleed into the eastern sky. The fire at the Gilded Lily was a distant orange glow in the mirror, a funeral pyre for two monsters and the woman who had dared to stop being their pawn. 6 months later, the coastal air of a quiet, nameless town in the Mediterranean felt like the first real breath Alara had taken in a decade. There were no neon lights here, no armored SUVs, and no men who believed that ink or blood gave them the right to own a woman's soul. Alara sat at a small wooden table outside a cafe, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. She wore a simple white linen dress, not because a man had chosen it for her, but because she liked the way the fabric felt against her skin. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed for gala appearances, was loose and windswept. On her collarbone, where a mark should have been, there was nothing but clear, unblemished skin. "The morning paper," Sophia said, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked younger, the shadows beneath her eyes replaced by a quiet, steady peace. Alara glanced at the headline. The federal trials were the lead story. Nikolai Sokolov had survived the fire, but only to face a life sentence in a maximum security cell, his reputation and fortune dismantled by the very data Alara had unleashed. Dante Moretti's body had never been recovered from the river, but in the world of power, a man with no money and no territory was a ghost. "They're still looking for the whistleblower," Sophia noted, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "The FBI has a dozen theories, but none of them involve a decorative socialite and an analyst." "Let them look," Alara said, looking out at the turquoise expanse of the sea. "The woman they're looking for doesn't exist anymore." The satisfying conclusion wasn't just in the justice served. It was in the silence. Alara had reclaimed the parts of herself that Dante had tried to crush and Nikolai had tried to harvest. She was no longer a pawn, a prize, or a secret. She was simply Alara. A shadow fell over the table. A local man, perhaps a few years older than her with kind eyes and calloused hands, paused as he passed. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" he asked, his voice genuine, seeking nothing but a shared moment of appreciation. Alara looked up and smiled, a real, unfiltered smile that reached her eyes. "The most beautiful I've ever seen," she replied. As the man walked on, Alara felt a strange electric hum in her chest. It wasn't the adrenaline of a chase or the fear of a predator. It was the thrill of an empty page. She had walked away from a boss and outsmarted a rival, only to realize that the most dangerous person to her heart wasn't a man at all. It was herself and the limitless potential of her own freedom. She picked up a pen and a small leather journal. On the first page she didn't write a ledger or a code. She wrote a single sentence. "This is where my story actually begins. And that is how you burn down a kingdom to build a life." Alara went from a marked woman to the architect of her own destiny. What did you think of that final twist? Did Nikolai deserve his fate, or were you hoping for a different ending for Dante? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to see more powerful women taking back their lives, hit that subscribe button. We've got so many more stories to tell. Until next time, stay dangerous.